Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're broadcasting from. We have close to 700 people registered for today's webinar, so we're just allowing folks to jump in the room, and then we'll get started momentarily. So I just want to welcome everyone to today's webinar that the NIA is presenting as part of our Slate Dementia series of webinars overall. And today's topic is on women's health, menopause, and dementia, addressing misconceptions through evidence-based insights. My name is Dr. Samir Sinha, and I'm the Director of Health Policy Research at the National Institute on Aging, and I'm very happy to be here for today's webinar with two of my colleagues who I'll introduce in a moment. We'll just go to the next slide. Just want to start with a land acknowledgement. The NIA is based in Toronto, which is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and all newcomers, have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of respect and friendship and peace. We'll go to the next slide. So I wanted to first of all introduce our two speakers who will be joining us today to present their work related to our topic, but then also to join us for the Q&A session that will go for the last half of our webinar. The first person who will be speaking is Professor Natasha Rajah. She is a professor and Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in the Department of Psychology at Toronto Metropolitan University, and she's an adjunct scientist at the Rotman Research Institute at Baycrest. In her Brain Health Equity and Aging and Memory Lab, or also known as BAM at TMU, she conducts cognitive and clinical neuroscience research on memory, aging, and dementia prevention. She uses structural and functional magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, in combination with behavioral neuropsychological, blood-based endocrine and protein analysis, and genetic methods to advance knowledge about what biological, environmental, and social factors support the maintenance of normative memory across the adult lifespan, and what factors negatively affect cognitive and brain aging and place individuals at a greater risk of developing Alzheimer's dementia. Dr. Gillian Einstein is the Wilfred and Joyce Posluns Chair in Women's Brain Health and Aging and a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. She's also an adjunct scientist at Baycrest and Women's College Hospitals and an honorary doctor of medicine at the Linköping University in Sweden. She is published on vision, Alzheimer's disease, pain, sleep, and estrogen's effect on memory and cognition. She is funded by CIHR, Brain Canada, the Ontario Brain Institute, the Centre for Aging and Brain Health and Innovation, and Women's Brain Health Initiative. And to help understand how early life events, including surgeries and cultural practices, affect the trajectory of women's brain health over the lifespan. Her lab's current focus is on how estradiol loss and treatment, as well as stigma and immigration, affect memory and cognition in diverse populations of women. So I want to thank them very much. The way our order of our agenda is Dr. Rajah will go first by presenting some of her work, then Dr. Einstein will go second to present her work, and then just after 12:30, halfway through our webinar, we will start the Q&A sessions. As you'll see in the chat box down below, there are just some instructions for everybody in terms of how you can submit a question for any of our presenters today. You can do so in the Q&A box. And if you have any technical questions or issues, you can put those in the chat box. So, so in your handlebar there, you'll see the Q&A box where we welcome your questions. And then in the chat, if you have any other comments or technical issues, please let us know there. So without further ado, I'm going to give the stage over to Dr. Rajah to present her work.
Great. Thank you, Samir, for introducing me. And it's a pleasure to be here to talk to you today as part of the Women's Health, Menopause, and Dementia topic. So next slide. So before I begin, I just want to acknowledge my funders, CIHR, NSERC, CCNA, and the Canada Research Chairs Program, in addition to Alzheimer's Society and Healthy Brains, Healthy Lives, and my collaborators and team that supported the work I'm going to talk to you a bit about today. Next slide. So today I'm going to talk to you about sex differences in episodic memory and brain aging, and midlife is a critical period in adulthood. And it kind of is a nice segue to then what Dr. Einstein will talk to you about as well in relation to women's brain health. So before I begin, I just want to talk a bit about what is episodic memory. So episodic memory is what many of us consider as memory. So it's our memory for our past personal experiences in rich contextual detail. So in real life, it reflects our ability to mentally time travel back to previous experiences and relive those events, such as your vacation, remembering that really nice meal you had and the taste. That rich re-experiencing of our past, that is what we call episodic memory. And in the lab, we test episodic memory using a variety of tasks, including simple things like wordless learning, and then asking you if you recognize a word, or asking you to free recall a series of words. But to get into even more detailed aspects of episodic memory, we use tasks such as context memory tasks, where we ask you to memorize, say, a face and its location on a screen, or a face and its location in relation to a scene. And so these types of experimental tasks are what we use in the lab to try and recreate and understand what are the neural correlates of episodic memory in healthy aging. Now, why do we want to study healthy episodic memory in healthy aging? Next slide, please. So aging is related to cognitive differences across many different modalities and processes. But one ability that shows a marked decline with aging is episodic memory. So here's a summary slide from a seminal paper by Denise Park and Patty Ruda Lawrence that kind of summarizes the literature on cognitive aging. And one thing I want you to highlight is that the blue lines for long-term memory, which often in the public we call episodic memory as well, shows a marked decline with aging. So we want to understand what is the neural basis of this normative form of age-related decline in order to contrast it with pathological forms of memory decline. So episodic memory is also the earliest and most consistent deficit observed in Alzheimer's disease. So one of the main questions that researchers like myself have is to differentiate, well, what is the neural correlates and what are the behavioral abilities that differentiate normative episodic memory decline from pathological? So to answer questions when people say, oh, I'm forgetting my keys, is that a sign of Alzheimer's disease? No, that's not a sign of Alzheimer's disease. That's usually a sign of normative aging. So next slide, please. So in a seminal paper by Bachman et al. In 2001, they had Alzheimer's patients perform a series of word list learning. So you don't have to pay attention to the details, but the main message is that whereas normative adults have the ability to maintain or ability to recognize past events, but maybe lose the ability to remember contextual details, such as where I left my keys, where I parked my cars, individuals with Alzheimer's disease not only show that deficit, but they also show a difficulty in remembering just encountering an event. So the ability to recognize a previous event or the ability to recall a previous event as occurring. Next slides, please. So in other words, there are differences in episodic memory decline that differentiate normative and pathological aging. So as normative aging is related to context memory decline, so the inability to remember details and contextual details about our past events, but recognition memory is relatively preserved. In contrast, in Alzheimer's disease, you have both context memory decline and difficulties in recognizing past events. Next slide, please. So in recent years, there's been a lot of interest in looking at prevention into Alzheimer's disease. And this is because there's currently no cure for Alzheimer's disease, and the drugs that are currently available for Alzheimer's disease are not as effective on everybody as we would like. So really one of the most promising future avenues of research is really early detection, intervention, and prevention of conversion to Alzheimer's disease. And indeed, it's been hypothesized that adults that are at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease actually show neuropathology at midlife, making midlife a critical period in adulthood for studying and for early detection and intervention. Next slide, please. However, very little is known about episodic memory ability at midlife. And remember, I said that episodic memory decline is one of the earliest and most profound deficits observed in Alzheimer's disease. So we first wanted to conduct a study called the Montreal Adult Lifespan Study that was conducted in my lab between 2012 and 2018 to understand whether or not we're able to detect episodic memory decline at midlife. And so in this study, we actually used a context memory paradigm, the ability, this type of memory that tends to decline with normative aging. And what we saw was that even in normative aging, there are declines apparent at midlife. So by the age of 40, adults have a difficulty memorizing and then remembering details such as the spatial location of a face that they previously saw. So this highlighted to us that midlife is a critical period, even for studying episodic memory and its neural correlates. Now, this was a study in which we used event-related fMRI. So this is a type of magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, that allows us to capture the brain's activity every 2 seconds while someone is performing a memory task. So we were able to differentiate activation that was successful, related to successful memory versus unsuccessful memory. Next slide, please. And so one of the effects we saw was that there were differential patterns of activation in a broad range of networks within the brain that differentiated age, which is in the black bars, from performance. So with advanced aging, you saw reductions in the area of activations in the blue areas and increases in the red areas, but this was related to poor performance in aging. Next slide, please. We also identified a subset of areas in the frontal and parietal regions that was related to increased activity with advanced age at encoding. But this was not related to supporting memory, at least when we looked at adults, when we did not differentiate by sex in this analysis. Next slide, please. So from our initial analysis of the study, we determined that there were different patterns and different networks related to age-related decline. And some of these patterns were highlighted at midlife. For example, there was changes in prefrontal activation and medial temporal lobe and occipital activation, areas very critical for episodic memory, apparent at midlife. Next slide, please. However, in this initial analysis, we assumed that the neural correlates of these age-related memory decline were the same in males and females. Now, why did we make this assumption? Next slide, please. Because behaviorally, we do not see any differences in this memory decline. However, what's important to note is that there are sex differences in the prevalence of many diseases, including Alzheimer's disease. So 2/3 of cases of Alzheimer's disease is diagnosed in females. Next slide, please. So even though we behaviorally didn't see sex differences in our lifespan study on memory and age-related memory decline in the brain, we decided to look at the neural correlates and whether or not there were sex differences in the neural correlates of this episodic memory decline. Next slide, please. So in other words, even though the performance that we observed in males and females was the same as a result of aging, are the brain correlates of age-related memory decline the same in males and females? Now, it's important to answer this question because it would indicate that different brain areas and different treatments might be most effective for males and females, even though on a behavioral level, the memory decline observed is similar. Next slide, please. So to do this, my former student, Sivanya Subramania-Pillai, reanalyzed our original adult lifespan study to disaggregate the analysis by sex. And what we saw was that initial pattern of brain activity in frontal and parietal regions that was increased with age at encoding, but that did not seem to support subsequent memory in males or females, was driven by females. And in females, when you disaggregated the analysis, this increase in activation in frontal and parietal regions at encoding actually supported subsequent memory. So disaggregating brain imaging studies by sex is critical for identifying sex-specific brain differences with aging that might lead to the development of new treatments that are sex-specific as well. Next slide, please. So this is just showing you that when we did not disaggregate our analysis, we could not see this beneficial effect for memory in females. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, from this study, we concluded that women and men exhibit similar brain behavior associations at encoding and to some extent at retrieval. But there are prevalent sex differences in the effect of age on the neural correlates of memory. Now, this indicates that different interventions and different treatments might need to be developed to support memory and aging in males compared to females. Our results also highlight that midlife is a critical period when episodic memory decline, even in normative aging, is apparent. Now, the big question remains, well, is this decline in midlife indicative of just normative aging in all individuals, or in some middle-aged adults, is this decline that we observed indicative of early signs of Alzheimer's disease? Next slide. So with this in mind, we are now conducting the Brain Health and Midlife and Menopause study, which has 4 goals. First, we want to understand whether or not there are biological differences in the effect of age on memory at midlife and how menopause status might contribute to this effect, given that 2/3 of females that experience menopause during midlife also complain about having brain fog and memory dysfunction. So that parallels the 2/3 of females that are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So this raises the important question that perhaps how a female's brain experiences menopause and midlife may be an early indicator of how they will age in later life. So this is the primary goal of the BAM study, to understand how biological sex and menopause status affects the neural correlates of brain aging and memory function. We also plan to look at how modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease interact with biological sex at this critical age, and then also how lifestyle and social determinants of health affect individual differences in brain aging trajectories at midlife. So that's the study that I'm now conducting, and Dr. Einstein is a collaborator on this study as well. And if you want to sign up, next slide, please. Please scan this QR code. So I just want to highlight that there are sex differences in brain aging, and it's important that we pay attention to them because they could lead to sex-specific treatments and interventions to support cognitive aging across the adult lifespan. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajah. And already, if you look in the Q&A section, you'll see that there are some specific questions that have come in regarding your presentation. So please have a look at those as well, and we'll get to those more specifically in the Q&A session. But thank you. And this is great because already some of the questions coming in are asking about menopause and also other aspects of postpartum situations as well. So this is a great entree for Dr. Einstein now to talk about the many menopauses, effects on cognition and women's brain health. Dr. Einstein, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak today. It's an amazing crowd, so to speak. And I think Natasha and I have worked together long enough that we make a good kind of partnership in drilling down into what some of the issues are for women's brain changes at midlife. Next slide, please. So what I want to do today is to, first of all, say what menopause is, and then talk about the many pauses, focus on surgical menopause, which is one of them, and then describe some of the decrements in behavior and brain in young women with surgical menopause, which we see in our studies. And then talk to you also about how these women actually experience these decrements or changes, and then some summation and conclusions. Next slide, please. So menopause, strictly defined, means you don't menstruate for a year. That means there's no bleeding from the uterus, no need for napkins, no need for tampons for a full year. And that is the point at which menopause kicks in. at the end of that year. And it turns out that actually the North American Menopause Society and the Endocrine Society, in spite of this sort of blanket description, have described 4 subtypes of menopause, each one with their own reasons and ages. So the first one is spontaneous menopause, and I like to say that's the one I'm in. And it happens around the age of 50, average age 51. There's early menopause between the ages of 40 to 45 years, and that's due to the absence of menstruation with no clinical reason. There's premature menopause, which is before the age of 40, and an example of that might be premature ovarian involution or failure, a waxing and waning of ovarian function. And then there's induced menopause, which covers chemotherapy, the removal of the uterus, which might also include lead to ovarian dysfunction, a removal of the ovaries, which is called an oophorectomy or a bilateral salpingo oophorectomy, and ovarian ablation via radiation. All of these have distinct hormonal changes leading up to and after the cessation of menstruation, and each one has unique health and cognitive consequences. And I really cannot emphasize that enough. Next slide, please. So why does removal of the ovaries or intervention with the ovaries actually make a difference to the brain? Well, there's an extremely important ovarian brain connection. In fact, I took out a slide that shows how the ovaries and what it secretes affect every single body system, just as Natasha Rajah mentioned to you. This ovarian brain connection actually starts in the brain with a region called the hypothalamus, and it projects to, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but it projects to a region called the pituitary, and very specifically the anterior pituitary, which then sends out modulating factors to the ovaries that influences the production of estrogens and also progesterone. And the secretion then of those factors, estrogens and progesterones, through the blood supply, get back to the brain. They affect the brain. All these pink circles are regions in the brain that actually have the ability to detect estrogen, or what I call 17 beta estradiol. And they also then send signals back to the hypothalamus and the pituitary. And you get this really lovely circuit between the brain, the ovaries, and the brain again. Next slide, please. What's interesting is that when we reviewed the literature on different types of menopause and looking at cognition, we found that most of the studies, that is 19 out of 50 studies, did not differentiate between the different types of menopause. So some women in the study might have gone into menopause at the age of 35. Some women in the study might have gone into menopause at the age of 51. And this has really confused the literature, because when we found the few studies that actually differentiated menopause type, got very clear results on its effect on cognition and memory, but the ones that included anybody who was in menopause at the time they opened the study, had very inconclusive kinds of results. Next slide, please. So again, any one of these different types of things that happen to people, to women in midlife, and I would say early midlife. So we're actually concerned probably 10 years earlier than Natasha's study, because we want to find actually the very earliest times when changes in the brain might be happening that are influenced by loss of 17 beta estradiol or estrogen that might lead to late life Alzheimer's disease. So they might include chemotherapy, premature ovarian failure, disordered eating, the female athlete triad, adjuvant therapy like aromatase inhibitors, or oophorectomy. Next slide, please. So I want to talk to you about oophorectomy and the removal of the ovaries, which is probably the most drastic type of menopause you can go into. You can see here, bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy includes removal of both the ovaries and the fallopian tubes. And when you do that, immediately no more estradiol is being secreted. There's no perimenopausal period. There's no transition. It's boom, nothing. And this severs the connection between the ovaries and the brain. And so the brain starts to not see any more 17 beta estradiol either. And again, the effect is relatively immediate. Next slide, please. What happens when the ovaries are removed, especially at early age? Well, first of all, it's correlated with decreased ability to remember stories, episodic memory, just like Dr. Rajah was discussing. If estradiol is not given within 3 months post ovarian removal, the earlier the surgical menopause, the steeper the slope of cognitive decline. And that's what you see on this slide. Women who had their ovaries removed roughly at the age of 38 had a steeper decline than women who kept their ovaries and went into spontaneous menopause. And Riley Bove, the investigator on this study, was lucky enough to get the brains an autopsy, and she found more plaques, a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, and more tangles in neurons, another hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, in the brains of women at the end of life who had their ovaries removed by the age of 38. Next slide, please. So when we looked in the UK Biobank, a very big database, we found that resilience factors for Alzheimer's disease in women were taking estradiol therapy if you had your ovaries removed before the age of 50, and your level of education. If you had your ovaries removed and you carried a risk factor for late life Alzheimer's disease, the apolipoprotein E4 variant, that increased your risk of Alzheimer's disease by 4 times. Next slide, please. Imaging BSO if the women have their ovaries removed by the average age of 46, by the age of 63, there are changes in the brain. There's a region called the amygdala is smaller. Regions that are affected first in Alzheimer's disease, like the parahippocampal and entorhinal cortices, are affected. And white matter, which is what carries signals from one part of the brain to the other, is also affected. When they ask the women about sleep, it turns out that the removal of their ovaries by the age of 59 or 60, they had worse sleep duration. They didn't sleep as long. They didn't sleep as much during the night, and they had a harder time going to sleep. Next slide, please. A risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So we started studying women who had what's called risk-reducing bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy because they carry a mutation for a gene that can lead to a high risk of breast and ovarian cancer, the BRCA1 or 2 gene. And it turns out that if you remove the ovaries, it really increases life expectancy. And in the United States, I can't find statistics for Canada actually, but in the United States, over 600,000 oophorectomies are performed annually, with 50% of them being bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. Next slide. So these are the women we studied, and we recruited them from 1 to 10 years post-ovarian removal. Each woman was tested once a year for 3 years. So we tried to get a kind of longitudinal study. And we looked at both episodic memory, verbal episodic memory, but also spatial working memory, the kind of memory that helps you remember where you put your keys or where you parked your car on a given day. We did brain imaging. We looked at sleep. We measured hormones. We looked at markers for inflammation. We did qualitative interviews to find out what the experience is like for the women. And we do something called body mapping storytelling, which I'll tell you about in a moment. So we call this a small but deeply phenotyped cohort. Next slide, please. And just to give you an idea of what our demographics look like, the average age at which we're studying the women is around 44 years of age in the different categories. They're all highly educated. Everyone pretty much has a university degree, at least. They are not overweight. Their BMI is fairly average. The time since bilateral salpingo oophorectomy is on the average of 5 years. So it's later than the earlier studies, but earlier than the big studies showing that at the end of life, women have a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. Next slide, please. And when we ask the women, how are these memory changes experienced for you? Are you having any problems remembering things or concentrating? They say things like, I started noticing memory problems. The issue is primarily in the speed of recall. I can eventually remember the name that I'm searching for. It just seems to take far more time. I notice this lag with names or people, as well as names of books or places. So you hear an episodic memory problem here. It's as if a blank space opens up in my mind, and I'm trying to fill it with the information that I know is filed somewhere in my brain. The problem is worse if I'm sleep deprived. Okay, I'm going to skip this next one. Next slide, please. So we found in this group that obviously estradiol and progesterone are lower. If the women are taking estradiol therapy, they have reduced inflammation. Sleep is disrupted. They have more nighttime awakenings. Women with BSO spend significantly decreased time in the most restful phase of sleep. And sleep disordered breathing is something that we see as well. Next slide, please. Behaviorally, memories for stories and word lists decrease, so episodic memory is worse. And these women are on average probably 10 years younger than the women in Dr. Rajah's study. Matching faces to names, associative memory is worse. Women in spontaneous menopause, however, do worse than everyone else. So age seems to add to this problem. And without estradiol therapy, women with BSO make more errors on remembering stories and spatial locations over time. So the problem progresses over time. Next slide, please. And when we ask them if they have any problems remembering things, again, all of a sudden they start talking about menopause. We don't even ask about menopause, but they say, in some ways, I look forward to being more middle-aged and into the point where women will generally be without their hormones, because then I won't feel like such an outlier. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll feel less pressured to feel more normal because it'll be okay at this point in my life. I would probably be low on estrogen anyways. So this suggests that being told that they're in menopause is actually stigmatizing to them. And in some ways, maybe the whole concept of menopause is stigmatizing, but you'll have to wait for Lucy's papers for us to talk about that more. Next slide, please. So I just want to tell you about the body mapping storytelling very quickly, where we ask them to tell us where on their body their memories resided. And we gave them a whole bunch of arts materials. And then we drew the full outline of their body, and we asked them to use those art materials to show us where their memory was. So just two themes that came out of that. Next slide, please. Are chaos around the head. All of them show problems with their heads and their brains, streamers coming out of their brains, clouds, and messed up spirals in their brains, their hair in a complete explosion with little bubbles coming out of their brains. So they identify their memory with their brains, but their brains aren't working very well. Next slide, please. And the other theme is memory tools. So women keep lists like crazy, diaries, lists. They do things like card games. They use barbells. They do exercise. They write notes, and they talk about helping hands or people who help them remember. Next slide, please. So, for evidence-based treatment of cognitive problems, it's really important to acknowledge differences between types of menopause. All menopauses are not created equal, and to understand cognition specifically, you need to understand the menopause type. Bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy prior to spontaneous menopause or the age of spontaneous menopause may be the riskiest with respect to late life AD. I won't repeat what I said already in terms of time. Next slide, please. So it's important to acknowledge these differences and understand that estradiol therapy might ameliorate some of the changes and contribute to resilience, but it's not a silver bullet. Next slide, please. So some menopauses take more of a toll than others. We need to consider other ameliorations to estradiol because some people can't take estradiol therapy. We need to start therapies early as the age of 45 or even 40 or even 38, depending on when they went into menses and when they went into menopause. We need to take sleep seriously as a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Estradiol therapy may help, but it's not a silver bullet. We need to think about bioenergetics with antioxidants, reduce inflammation with anti-inflammatories, and as I like to say, keep your ovaries if you possibly can. Next slide, please. And with that, I just want to thank my collaborators, trainees, and all my funders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Einstein, and thank you very much, Dr. Rajah. Those were two excellent presentations, a lot of information, a lot of detail, but it really shows us the incredible work that the two of you are leading with your collaborators and teams to really try and demystify some of these areas and really kind of understand the subtleties and the differences that need to be thought of, especially given how important this is. When currently 60% of women living, or 60% of the people living in Canada with dementia are women. So there's a gendered aspect to this, and there's many subtleties here. So there's just been some general questions that have come in asking about, will people get a copy of the slides? Absolutely. After our webinar is completed, we will be putting a copy of the recording and the information related so people can revisit the webinar again. So just wanting to people know that. And we certainly will make sure that people can get a link so that if you want to join the BAM study or any of the other work that Dr. Einstein or Dr. Rajah are leading, we will make sure that at the very end of this presentation, you'll also see a slide with links to their labs so that you can learn how you can participate more in the work that they're doing and learn about the work of others as well. So with that being said, Dr. Rajah, you've already kindly answered some questions that were coming in. I just want to put the first question then to you. Were there, from some of the first questions that you did answer, were there ones that you just wanted to kind of just quickly summarize what you said so for the broader audience to hear? Oh, and we'll just get you
Sure.
off.
So yeah, unmuting always, right? So there was one question about whether or not, I think this is important information, whether or not the age of your mom when she experienced menopause, if that's predictive of your experience of menopause. And I responded to that question saying that the epidemiological research indicates that it's 44% heritability, meaning there is a high level of heritability, but there is a lot of environmental influences on your age of menopause too. So just because your mom menopaused early doesn't necessarily mean you will as well. So that
And
was
building on that too, absolutely. It's the common, it's interesting when we look at some of the data from some of the Public Health Agency of Canada surveys looking at what are the risk factors. And most Canadians feel genetics are some of your biggest risk factors for developing dementia, where actually they only represent a minority. Even though dementia is very common, especially as we age, we say, oh, my grandmother or my mother had it, therefore I will probably have it. Not necessarily, but we know age is the greatest risk factor, and there's differences that need to be considered. So thanks for tackling that, Dr. Rajah. One of the questions that have just come in was there's so much focus on HRT. So I'm going to take this to Dr. Einstein first. But so how do we know if this is something that we need to help us maintain normal brain function as we age? You certainly talked about keep your ovaries if you can, for example, but you also notice that there's subtleties around the estradiol and others that we need to think about.
Right. So first of all, I think it's important to say that there are many types of hormone therapy, that's a big overarching term. And I wanted to clarify that the women in our study took a type of hormone therapy called estradiol therapy. And it is in some ways the closest to what we make ourselves, endogenous 17 beta estradiol. And I think in animal studies, that has turned out to be probably the most effective on cognitive decline, such as it is in rodents. And I think a lot of us who work in the fields suspect that it is also the most effective type for women. Should everybody who is aging normally take hormone therapy? I would say, not being an MD, I would say that there's not an answer to that at this point, but likely it might not be important for everybody. I think the consensus is that if you have your ovaries or removed or you've lost ovarian function before the age of 45 to 50, it probably is extremely beneficial to take hormone therapy if you possibly can. And I would say estradiol therapy of that type. Again, I think the evidence is for older women, the sooner you start taking it, the more likely it is to be effective. That is to take it at the perimenopausal period. But I think at this point, the research consensus is out as to whether it actually improves the larger number of people's cognition and memory.
Perfect. So lots of questions here, and I invite either of you to look further at them. Go ahead, Dr. Rajah.
Yeah, so just to build off of what Dr. Einstein just said on HRT use, there are risk factors for taking HRT as well. If you have poor heart health, if you're at risk for stroke, these are things that, it's counterindicative to taking HRT. So it's really important that you talk to your family physician before you decide to take HRTs, because it really is a personalized approach that's needed for hormone replacement therapy. And as Dr. Einstein said, we're currently looking, like the research is ongoing into the benefits at perimenopause. We don't have the answer. There is some evidence from the WIM study that for late, if you're 65 and above, it's probably not a good idea to start HRT. But again, talk to your doctor. I'm not an MD, and nor is Dr. Einstein, so it really is important that you talk to your family physician before making these health decisions.
I wanted to step in and answer a question about reproductive life events. I think there was a question about pregnancy, and there's actually recent evidence from at least three studies from large databases showing that your lifetime exposure to estrogens is protective against Alzheimer's disease. And lifetime exposure can include when you started menstruating. The earlier you start menstruating, potentially the longer the exposure you have to estradiol in your lifetime. The later you go into menopause is another factor that might be a resilience factor, and also the number of children you have. Now, there's some interesting data that show up to 3 children may be protective because you have more estradiol being produced during the time of child bearing. But more than 3 or more than 5, I think it is, Natasha, correct me if I'm wrong, is not protective. And I always think this is a really kind of interesting problem, because it actually, more than 5 may not have to do with estradiol exposure. It may be that you're just being driven crazy by all these children and you have all this stress, but I really don't know. I mean, nobody has an answer to that. But so I think there's some very intriguing findings about lifetime exposure to the estradiol that you make.
Just building on that too, Dr. Einstein and Dr. Raja, if you'd like as well. People were also asking about the role of progesterone, but also even testosterone. And Martha, for example, asked, are you considering the role of testosterone in these studies? It's my understanding that the 3 sex hormones, estradiol, progesterone, testosterone, work together. It's not just estrogen. Do you care to mention that? Just how do you think about these other hormones? Dr. Raja, we'll start with you.
So you're correct, whoever put that question. So in the UK, when females go in for HRT care, they get estradiol, progesterone, and testosterone as part of their recommended care in Europe and in the United Kingdom. That's not true here in Canada. In our study, in the BAMP study, we are measuring progesterone, estradiol levels, testosterone, FSH, LH, so many of the steroid hormone levels in our females as they perform the study I described from the lifespan study, which we're now continuing focusing on women's health. And there was another question about, I'm on HRT, I'm still experiencing brain fog. Does this go away? So that is a very important question. There's not many longitudinal studies during the menopause transition that can answer that question. It is something that we hope to do as well, to follow up individuals as they go through transition to see whether or not their cognitive function returns. I'm sure all of us have stories from some individuals whose cognition remains affected post-menopause and others who do not. I do know that a lot of it has to do with sleep. So I think sleep disruption, as Dr. Einstein mentioned, is a big factor. And those vasomotor symptoms that we experienced during menopause transition really need to be taken care of. And there's many medications that are more for vasomotor symptoms that you could talk to your doctor about. But there's also health and lifestyle factors such as exercise, eating right, making sure you have a good sleep hygiene routine.
Yeah, just to add to what Dr. Raja said, um, it's, sleep disruptions during menopause are not just due to hot flashes. I'll just mention estradiol again, but it actually, the system that regulates sleep in the brain is very sensitive to estradiol. So that's why we think we see difficulties breathing and problems going to sleep, and not just nighttime awakenings due to hot flashes. So I think both aspects really need to be taken care of. And I would say if you're having problems sleeping, don't be shy about talking to your doctor about getting a sleep study, because a sleep study can really pinpoint things. With respect to testosterone, progesterone, estradiol, we measure all that too. We haven't seen that our results depend on progesterone at all. Many of the women in our study actually, going back to Dr. Raja's point that it's very personalized hormone therapy, it takes a long time for them to figure out exactly what regimen works for them. And so some women in our study are actually on testosterone plus estradiol, some are on testosterone alone. But I would say when you remove the ovaries, it's the ovaries that actually make testosterone. So you can't have estrogen without making testosterone. So we're also, if we have our ovaries removed, we're also losing testosterone. So it's, as you know, the different countries' guidelines suggest, it's very individual. Nothing is terribly clear right now. And so it's worth really making sure you get the right treatment or lack of treatment for you. And I also want to say once again, hormone therapy of whatever type is not necessarily a silver bullet. Even in the young women with their ovaries removed, we don't always see that the women taking estradiol therapy improve.
And I think we're getting, because we have a lot of questions that have come in, for example, like what's the right age to start estradiol therapy? Or, people are remarking to your comment about, kind of keep your ovaries if you can, if you will. And some people are saying, what happens if I just have one? Like I've lost them both, or if I had one, is that, what is the right timing? What are the right circumstances? But I think one thing that I'm hearing from the both of you is that everybody is individual, and that even kind of the idea that that well, you said it already, there is no silver bullet. And these are, I think, and everybody's has individual situations depending on other factors related to their health as well that might influence kind of the advice that they get from their say their gynecologist, for example, or their family doctor, whoever is helping them kind of navigate these issues. But any thoughts there, just in terms of some of the questions, about people asking about timing of removal of ovaries, to if I just have one, is that okay? Will that be okay, to timing of estrogen, or is this back to it's very individual for each person?
Well, I think there's good data that if you have one ovary, you're in pretty good shape. um, so the removal of only one ovary is not as drastic for your brain or the rest of your body systems as the removal of two. Um, as to when you take hormone therapy, again, as Dr. Rajah pointed out, I think that's something really individualized, really good to talk to your physician about. I wanted to say with respect to nutrition, because I know there was a question about that as well, and lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
We like to say anything that's good for your heart is good for your brain. So if you eat heart healthy food, if you exercise, those are all very good things for your brain. And although, the studies aren't in yet, it turns out that in spontaneously menopausal women who are aging normally, exercise is cognitively beneficial. So the lifestyle factors are also very important.
And one person was just mentioning that it's an interesting question. They said with the personalized levels of estradiol, progesterone, and testosterone that Dr. Einstein just mentioned, does it mean it's beneficial to perhaps get an assessment or snapshot of our hormone makeup well before menopause? Almost kind of to kind
I'll
of,
let Natasha answer that
yeah,
one.
go for that, Natasha.
So I wish the answer was yes, but the honest answer is we don't know. Like there's just not enough information. I myself am, I'm doing me search, I jokingly say now, because I'm in menopause transition, and I asked that same question to a physician not too long ago, and the question is we don't know enough to know what is normative for you. Right? So one measure is not enough information. It's something that we would have to measure multiple times over a long period of time to really understand what is a normative level for you. Because estradiol, these things fluctuate with our monthly cycles as females as well. And so, a one-time snapshot is not going to give you an answer. One thing I would recommend, though, is to have your heart health assessed before you decide to go on menopause therapy, because these hormones don't only affect the brain, they affect the heart as well. And there's a strong connection, as Dr. Einstein says, between heart health and brain health. And if you are counterindicative for heart-related reasons, you really should consult your physician and be followed if you decide on some of these medications that affect hormone levels.
We have one of our older participants who's saying, I was on HRT from 2002 to 2024, but I stopped at age 75. I was told that HRT doesn't have much positive effect after 75. Is that accurate?
I don't really think we know.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think being told that comes from the studies showing that if you started at later ages, it's not particularly beneficial. But I don't think we have any good studies showing that if you start it and you stay on it, whether it continues to be beneficial, or if you go off it, whether it's harmful. And this is actually something that the women in our cohort are very concerned about, because they are afraid that when they get to the age of spontaneous menopause or 51, they'll be taken off their hormone therapy. And that's a concern to them, because for the ones it helps a lot.
No, certainly, and I think that, we don't know all the specifics about this individual, and we don't give out medical information per se, but it also depends on every individual. I have some older patients who, this has been very helpful to deal with active symptoms, for example. So I would certainly not recommend, telling them, well, you have to come off of it now because of a certain age. I would certainly ask them to, again, work with their gynecologist or their family doctor, their women's health specialist, whoever's prescribing them, to say, okay, why are we prescribing this? Is it actually showing a benefit for you? And if it is, then we might continue that as well. So it's, everybody's quite individual in terms of how we look at this. And that's important. I'm just looking through some of the other ones. Dr. Einstein,
Yeah,
did you
I was
want
just, well, I wanted to say something about studies that are considered evidence.
to? Mhm.
So, when what we talk about is evidence and what we still need very much in the range of all types of menopause and hormone therapy are large studies. But large studies end up giving you what's called, for those of you who don't know, a mean and a standard deviation. There's a peak where everybody most people fit, but then there are long tails on either side of that peak. And there are lots of people in those tails. And that's why it's so important that we think about personalized medicine and that we think about what it's like for each person, because you don't know whether you're going to be in that peak or maybe you're in that tail. And that's really important to keep in mind. And if you are in the tail, you really want to push for what's best for you.
Absolutely. Did you have any other thoughts, Dr. Rajah, that you wanted to mention?
So I see a lot of questions about PCOS and what
Mhm.
do we know about PCOS and how it interacts with menopause and cognition. So PCOS, like I said, when I earlier, it is we don't know. Like, we really need the research in these areas in women's health. In general, having PCOS increases risk for many late life disorders, so diabetes, obesity, a lot of diseases, but we don't know how it interacts with menopause to affect cognition. And there are some studies that are funded in Canada that are ongoing to address this. So pay it, keep listening to the medical news that's coming out. I think Dr. Einstein would agree that we need to invest more in women's brain health, as we could see from all, the interest and all the questions. I wish we had more answers for you. And the truth is, there's been very little investment in this area of study, and I think we see the need for it, and hopefully others do too, and we get continued funding to do these kind of projects so we could answer these questions and get better detail the next time we're invited on.
Yeah.
Perfect. And this brings a good opportunity to pull up our final slides here, because I think, Dr. Rajah, you were just going to mention to one of the questions is saying the survey only includes the area of Ottawa and Montreal. I assume the study is not for attendees from Ottawa for testing, but can you, we have your labs up here, but can you let us know we'll send people, again, information on the QR code to sign up for the BAM study, but who can get involved in your studies?
So we have two sites active for this study. So there's a site in Montreal, and there's also a site in Toronto. People have been very excited about the studies. We have had people from Ottawa drive to Montreal for the study, and that's why the Ottawa site is there as well. But it is up to you. But there is a testing site in Toronto and in Montreal. So it's open in both those two regions.
For our studies, we will recruit from Ottawa and Montreal. We will pay for people to come actually for the study. We're not actively recruiting for the oophorectomy study anymore, but we are recruiting for two other studies, one about aging in women from the Horn of Africa, and another one about trans cognition in trans women, to see what the long-term effects of hormone therapy are in that group. So for either of those studies, we are happy to pay travel or work as best we can through the internet for parts of the study.
So again, thank you so much to our speakers. We'll go to I think our next slide, and for sharing us, their wisdom as expert researchers in this space. There's a lot that they have taught us, and there's a lot that we need to learn. And we really welcome, Dr. Rajah and Dr. Einstein sharing us their wisdom, but also helping all those who have been here today to learn how they can participate in more research opportunities that can help us get the answers that clearly people want to know, especially just given kind of the fact that dementia remains a gendered disease. We have more women than men who are experiencing dementia, and we know that there are relationships between, again, women's health, menopause, these different issues, and brain health, and including dementia. So there's a lot more work to do, but I'm so grateful again that Dr. Rajah and Dr. Einstein could be with us today to share with us their wisdom and to help answer so many questions from amongst our viewers. We will be sending out after this webinar. There will be people will get a link so that they can watch it again, and certainly you'll get that information so that you can connect with their labs if you want to participate in more research and learning in this space as well. So thank you very much again to our speakers, and thanks to all of you who tuned in to watch our webinar today.